And thank you guys all so much for coming. I'm really excited to be out in Toronto with a pretty amazing group of panelists and a pretty amazing group of startups. So really just thrilled to be up here. But I guess to sort of kick things off, the best thing to do would be if I could just get a brief couple-minute intro from each one of you guys, sort of what your role is, what your past experience is, and maybe a few things that you're seeing in the space.
Good afternoon, folks. Tim Clark. I'm the CIO for TD's Canadian Banking and Wealth Division. Not necessarily the traditional person you'd expect to see up here on a FinTech panel. And with good reason, we're actually sitting here trying to give you some insights into how a big bank running a big, mainly retail division actually is changing. How we're embracing the future, how we're looking for the partnerships, the collaboration, and the ideas, quite frankly, that yourselves and our partners here actually bring. Been in Canada for 4.5 years. Been working within the technology space my entire career, and really seeing a very interesting change in terms of how we deliver software, how we go from a traditional big bank, big box into a much smaller bite-size componentry. Really trying to separate our big legacy backends, remove those as much as possible, and put in a whole different digital ecosystem that's really tuned to the customer. So very interested in this panel. Looking forward to where you're going to take us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Tang. I work with Deloitte. Recently just returned back to North America. Spent some time overseas for 5 years leading our Asia Pacific financial services practice, as well as the chief strategy officer living in New Zealand. So I spent a lot of time with the Australian banks. Been back for about 1.5 years, and my role within Deloitte is I lead our global financial services, digital transformation, and innovation practice. So what I can share with you are just some insights and the privilege that I've had speaking with both incumbents, fintechs, and regulators around the world.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Elsich. I work for CIBC. My role at CIBC is to head up our digital strategy, mostly focused on the retail side of the bank. Recently got an expanded mandate with a broader enterprise focus, so that's amazing. The other thing that I do at CIBC is I manage our relationship with Mars. So as many of you may or may not know, we have an expansive relationship with Mars. So thank you, Adam and team. We've got many things going on. So upstairs, we have our digital incubation lab called CIBC Live Labs. If you actually go up the escalator and you look to your right, there's some glass windows there. Feel free to stop by and talk to the team. The other things that we have at Mars, we sponsor Entrepreneurship 101, which is essentially a university course, for lack of a better term, for entrepreneurs and startups. We also have a relationship, it's called CIBC Live Lounge. It's launching very soon. It is a space upstairs. You may have seen it when you came in. That space is supposed to be for entrepreneurs during the day, workspace, collaboration space, and then events at evenings and on the weekends. And then lastly, we also have space for our digital team, specifically here in Mars in the Phase 2 building. We've done many things out of that room, including launch a recent mortgage app called Hello Home, where we co-located with a vendor. We've had our board of directors there talking about our Mars relationship. Very excited to be here. I think this is going to be an interesting panel.
Great. Hi, I'm Steve Kirsch. I'm CEO of Token, and we're a startup company based in both San Francisco and in London. And our company is developing open API technology that we sell to banks throughout the world, but we're focused in on selling to European banks. And so we're a US-based company, and you're wondering why would we be selling to European banks? And the reason is that there is a new European directive called Payment System Directive 2, or PSD2 for short. And it requires all 9,000 banks in the Eurozone to open up their APIs, because banking has been closed for almost the beginning of time, and there are very, very few banks. In fact, I can't even think of one that has actually I can think of one, Fedor Bank in Germany, that has an open API that you can move money and so forth. But by and large, banks have been closed to applications. And so this directive basically requires all 9,000 banks in the Eurozone to have open APIs. And my company is the leading supplier of those open APIs. So.
Great, thanks. All right, so I guess I think to kick this off here, it'd be nice to start with a bit of broader perspective from Michael. Given your experience, working with incumbents in fintech companies, throughout Southeast Asia, Australia, and North America, I'd love to hear, some global trends that you're seeing, as well as, some nuances you're seeing about those individual markets.
Cool, thanks, RJ. Let me start off with, this is like extremely exciting times right now. So the context of this rant or rattle will be really around fintechs, not necessarily startups. But there's truly what I see like a breakaway five cities that are in that fintech startup space. And it's notably Singapore, London, Hong Kong, Silicon Valley for the most part. And what I'm finding is like the London and Singapore, that particular theme right now is all around the regulatory area. They've really taken leadership, particularly with the FCA, as well as the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And they've taken both leadership roles to the extent that they're actually initiating sandboxes, which we might talk about, and taking on these fintechs and really guiding them and teaching them through these regulations. The second kind of group, or that triad of the five, I would throw in New York, obviously, and Hong Kong, just their physical proximity to the financial markets, and especially with Hong Kong close to China. They just have access to those financial areas. And then the third one is obviously around the Silicon Valley area. That they just have access to not only talent, the venture capital, but also the market size and scale. So those five would naturally bubble up into the hottest areas globally. But there's definitely some what I'll call breakout countries or cities that are quite unique. I had the privilege of going to Tel Aviv the last 2 months ago. I had no idea what to expect. But I have to admit, like in terms of that culture, the DNA around their boldness, innovation, and just that startup mentality of almost survival, just given the political situation they're in, I was like amazed. And what amazed me most is how the collaboration between the military, the public sector, the private sector, academia, all kind of work together. And there's these special areas within the military called 8200 that specialize solely in technology and cyber that just throw this right out to the next level. But what I think's holding them back right now is they just don't have that market size. So they're almost engineering their fintechs and startups to be globally deployed. So I would keep a watchful eye out of that particular area. The second breakout area is quite interesting is Ireland. If you take a look at their corporate tax rate, it's like 12.5%. And you take that, they're really spinning up a lot of activity around RegTech and asset management type of fintech areas. And then you partner or couple that up with just the maturity of the Googles and the Facebooks that are already in the Dublin area. They actually have a natural, I'll say, talent pool to draw from, and they have global operating model experience for such a small kind of fintech startup environment. So I find that quite interesting. And if I kind of draw upon those type of dimensions looking at fintech and back to Canada, I think we're moderately okay, probably above average, but there's a lot of opportunity for us, as you heard from Adam and Scott. I also think from a regulatory perspective, as well as government, there's probably space to not only learn from like the Singapores, the Australians, and the FCA in the UK. I would put like Canada on the level of a Shanghai or a Sydney in terms of potential growth for fintechs, but there's lots of room there. But I have to say, like our friends at Plug and Play, Mars, Ryerson DMZ, Communitech, these type of functions really start building awareness and educating the potential of fintechs within Canada. And if you look across the landscape, you have the maturity of a D&H. I mean, I buy my checks from you too, but if you take a look at how you've transformed, if you even value as a unicorn, like $1 billion in sales, $3 billion in market cap, like that's a very, very mature fintech. Zafin is getting a lot more on the global stage. What I like about them is they're unique. It's not the David versus Goliath scenario where fintech's going to overtake a bank. They've figured out through their kind of user pricing, product lifecycle management to actually work with the legacy debt, legacy baggage in conjunction with the incumbents, which is a very interesting model. And on the West Coast, similar to the RegTech conversation, Trulio. This is a identity verification management. And I know SOCOR is here this afternoon as well, but we're plugging Canadians right now. This is an organization that can actually verify 4 billion people. Like, that's more than half of the population of the world. They actually operate in over 50 countries, and they actually draw their verification data from over 200 sources, which are structured and unstructured. So these guys are really making an impact in terms of KYC, AML legislations, and they're already operating in many of the Australian banks, ANZ, CBA, Commonwealth, as well as the PayPals and eBays. So like, they're on the global map. And then you contrast like a D&H with this is the third plug that Matthew Spoke's going to get from Nuco. And full disclosure, I'm an angel investor. But these guys are like 3-4 months old. They're going to change the world in terms of being able to build on the Ethereum platform in terms of smart contracts, distributed ledger technology on blockchain. So we really enjoy, from a Canadian perspective, really a vast maturity. And if we figure out how they actually work together in conjunction, you can really amplify this space. So if you're like into technology, you love innovation, and you're in financial services, like, this is really exciting times for us.
Absolutely. And we're huge fans of all three of those companies. So definitely we appreciate the plug as well. So to kind of riff on the deployment of FinTech on a global scale that Michael was sort of just discussing, this is sort of directed at Tim and Greg, because I know, Tim, that you recently spent a bit of time abroad. Do you see opportunities for collaboration in sort of helping facilitate this global deployment of FinTech between, often competitive or just otherwise incumbent financial institutions, both locally and across the world?
Hell no. No, seriously. You're expecting that conversation, that comment. It's kind of funny. We sit here as big banks with a closed bank model, and Zafin, a great company, wouldn't even actually use the term FinTech when we actually talk to Zafin. Zafin just happens to be a company with some really cool product that we use, that we actually partner with now to develop new techniques inside our pricing and some of our billing functions. Arguably areas that you say, not sexy, not cool, but wow, the capabilities they produce and the capabilities they provide for us are changing how we can actually get better product into our customer hands and deal with our customers in a very different way. Mm-hmm. I went to London and can echo the comments around how London's growing. I left London about 4.5 years ago, took one of our teams out about a month ago, and actually was blown away by how it's changed. And I'm sure you're going to talk about the kind of the RegTech approach and how the governments, the regulators are working together to really change the ecosystem for the financial services and allow companies to actually do things very differently. I'll sort of riff onto one area. We're currently engaged in a very interesting payments program that a few of our group are here today. And one of the key things when we looked at companies we want to partner with, fintechs that we actually want to deal with, was how to create the right accessibility to that technical stack, knowing that we believe reg will change. We believe we've got to have the best products in the market, and really been taking a different approach to how we partner. Much like as Greg was saying, we've got different groups, different partnerships. We use community tech. We obviously have labs. Everybody's doing something very different in the banking space and finding great reward in doing so. The idea of that closed ecosystem, closed build shop or vendor shop, I think is long gone. And we're here obviously trying to demonstrate innovation, but also trying to listen to see what innovation exists out in the market today.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, just to jump on the closed, I think we talked a little bit earlier about some things that we've been working on at CIBC. So, we've been working and starting to think about working with banks abroad, right? I think there's a huge play here from a technology perspective. So technology these days allows us to do that. Think of open APIs, for example. Recently, we announced a partnership with NAB in Australia and Bank Leumi in Israel. And we've had some really interesting conversations. I've been leading kind of the digital front of that at CIBC. So we've been talking about everything from exchange, which is fantastic for ESAT, but more importantly and more interesting is the opportunity to co-develop, right? I think that's something that's very, very interesting. If you think of somewhere like Australia, we could be working on things all day and they can pick it up at the end of the night, right? There's lots of efficiencies there. Even just sharing roadmaps and what's going on in the marketplace, right? We've started to do that. We actually saw that we were a little bit late from NAB in a new CRM system that we implemented. And we realized very quickly, if we were already collaborating on a global perspective, when we were calling up people like Michael to help us with initial concept design and vendors and RFPs and what have you, we would have been able to share that cost, right? So I think there's lots of opportunities in that space, especially when it comes to kind of global partnerships across the FIs and with fintechs.
There's one area I'd actually add in as well, which is I don't think Greg and I were talking about this beforehand, there's very little that we do properly inside the ecosystem of Canada today. And I think there's a real opportunity for any of the companies to actually collaborate more deeply and further. We got introduced to a really cool company in London last month where they created essentially a clearinghouse for technology assets to come together. There's so many areas where we as organizations would not want to naturally build software, would not want to buy software, in fact, we don't even want to lease it. The amount of regulatory software we have to build that is, stay in business software that has no competitive advantage other than you can go bust naturally without having it or get fined significant values. But there's got to be a way for us to get a better clearinghouse to actually use techniques and software together. And I think there's a real opportunity here to bring a lot of different collaboration together.
Oh, absolutely. I would say to that effect, to kind of riff on what you're talking about with the reg tech. So how can entrepreneurs, and I think Steve, it might be interesting to hear you weigh in on this. How can entrepreneurs use regulatory tech to actually innovate where it might otherwise kind of stifle or restrict innovation?
So I think what's happening in Europe is really going to lead the world in terms of changing things and creating these open APIs. And so once that's been created, then it really changes everything. It's like today, if you can imagine your cell phone, people don't have cell phones anymore, they have smartphones, and the smartphones all have apps that are written for the smartphones. But if we could go back to the days when there were cell phones, and there was no ability really, there was some, but very infrequently would you download an app and open up your cell phone to third-party apps. Then along came smartphones, and suddenly you were able to then, it was a whole new world. And in just 7 years, we went from everybody having a cell phone to now everybody having a smartphone. And probably the number of people with does anyone have a cell phone that is not a smartphone? Okay, so in just 7 years, there's been a complete transformation of people using an old technology versus a new technology. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that the smartphones created an open API so that you could have applications that were added to your phone, and it made the phone so much more useful that you had to dump your cell phone. Now, the exact same thing that happened with cell phones is going to happen with banking. It just took a lot longer. And it wouldn't have happened. None of this would have happened if the regulators didn't say, enough. We're going to open up the banking to innovation. And as it turns out, even though the regulators had to do this, it's actually a really good thing for the banks, for the consumers, and for businesses. Because when open systems happen like this, when things are opened up and you have open APIs, amazing things happen. And another example of that is the internet. And when the internet started, it started as a network called the ARPANET. And you would think that, we have this, the government created this ARPANET, and of course everybody would want to get on it. Well, in fact, nobody wanted to get on it. And the government had to say, hey, we're not going to fund you. We're not going to give you, ARPA would say, we're not going to give you any funding at all unless you get on the internet, unless you get on the ARPANET at the time. And so they had to force people. They had to actually require people to, get on this open API. But once they did that, then people saw the value of it. And of course, now nobody's required to get on the internet. Everyone wants to get on the internet. And so the exact same thing that happened in the internet, in cell phones, is now going to be happening in banking. And the reason for it is this directive out of Europe. And that directive, when people see what happened, it'd be like, people saw what happened with the ARPANET and wanted to get on it. So the same thing's going to happen here. And that's just going to drive thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of new applications. And so if you think that the $1 billion, I think someone said $1 billion in the last 6 months were invested in Bitcoin, if you think that was a lot of money, Can you imagine how much money is going to be invested in startups that are going to take advantage of open APIs? Because now you're actually dealing with real money and not Bitcoin. I mean, the market cap of Bitcoin is in the tens of billions. But just one bank, like Citibank, moves $1 quadrillion a year. $1 quadrillion is 1,000 times $1 trillion, by the way, for people who haven't heard of that. But I mean, that is, I mean, these scales. This Bitcoin looks like rounding error. So the thing is that when banks open up their APIs, all this excitement that you hear about Ethereum and Bitcoin and the prediction of thousands or I thought I heard trillions of virtual currencies, that's all going to go away. Because people don't want to deal with virtual currencies. They want to deal with real currencies and real money. And once you give them the ability to do what they can do with Bitcoin, but do it actually better, safer, more secure, with guarantees, easier to use, simple, it will change everything.
I was just going to comment, absolutely agree. I think if the narrative is that fintechs are both innovative and disruptive to the business models of incumbent, as much as you heard Adam and Scott here talk about distributed ledger technology and blockchain, I personally believe PSD2, in terms of potential stealth game changer, is going to be huge, particularly to a North American audience. Because essentially, this legislation for 2018, right, if they actually meet it, are going to essentially make the banks do two things. They're going to open up their payment systems, which has traditionally been closed. So fintechs and non-traditional competitors will actually have access to a European payment system. And secondly, they're going to be forced through open APIs to disclose customer information, obviously, if you opt in. So the game-changing element about that is it's going to disrupt your business model, meaning that it could technically turn a bank into a pure commodity, scale, utility, because all they're going to be doing is providing payment information. So a really quick use case is if you buy something on Amazon, you're paying with your credit card, there's an acquiring bank, and then Amazon needs to collect. PSD2 is going to allow the bank and Amazon to talk directly. So you basically, if you're a credit card or any intermediary, you're going to be disrupted. And the real game changer, if banks actually think they're going to compete based on customer experience, with this PSD2 directive and allowing banks to give information to whoever they want, you get these fintechs that actually know how to create and deliver a delightful client experience. The banks are just going to be a harness, right? So, I mean, I'm directly trying to be provocative here because I was recently in the Netherlands speaking with Rabobank, and I just kind of had some fun and said, like, what are you guys going to do about it? And I think the advantage of the North American banks is it's not here yet. So from a business model, business process, right down to technical architecture for open APIs, like you're getting to see this a transparent window what's going to happen. So I mean, the advice or my point of view is like we're lucky right now that we can see how it shapes in Europe first.
So let me take the bait here and say that, there are good fintechs and there are bad fintechs. And the bad fintechs, those are the guys who are the enemies of the banks. And we are the good fintechs who are the friends of the bank. And so in our software, we actually have this amazing user experience, which you will be able to see at the demos. And I go on at 5 o'clock. So if you stay for that, you can see this. But it's amazing. It's a better user experience than you've ever seen before. For being able to do checkout, to be able to give permission, to be able to do it without having to have any passwords, without having to remember anything, and just with a single click. And so it's faster, easier, more secure, it's better for you, you don't give out secrets, it will be game changing. And we give this technology to the banks so that the banks can now compete against all these other fintechs who want to eat their lunch, and now it's a level playing field. And we're kind of the arms supplier for the banks. So we think, that's a good place to be. But hey, if someone comes up with anything better, then the banks are going to benefit from those additional transactions that wouldn't have happened because people would have dropped off. And so either way, I think the banks are going to come out winners. the consumers are going to come out winners, and FinTech companies are going to come out winners.
I think you bring the right point here, which is the consumers will come out winners. And I think that's the key ethos, and I'll let the jibe glance off us in terms of not good experience when it comes to the banking customer journey. I think, from both the CIBC and the TD side, I'm sure we'd both say that, we focus on our customers predominantly. And whilst at times we may not have actually seen how needs have been fit by our actual products, quite frankly, all of our companies are sitting at a different idealism in terms of how we can take advantage of technology, how we can actually partner with different products to actually produce the right experience for our customers. Convenience. You've gone from a human interaction perspective to this millennial notion, which I still find a little bit off to a degree, that everything's going to be online. I think there's a combination of all the different assets that make convenience be the play, full stop. And that is going to be about leveraging the right type of things that customers want, where they want it, when they want it, and how they want it. And I think that, with different products at the middle and the back tier, to allow that kind of seamlessness will be the key for how we will all win together, to be quite frank.
And it will be up to the banks, by the way, to make a decision as to which way they go. Because banks could go and do the minimalist approach and just have open APIs and just leave it at that. And if they do, then they will get disintermediated. But if they take a much more aggressive approach, then they actually turn the tables on today's disintermediation. Because when you check out with a credit card, you don't have a connection with the bank. But in the new world where there's a direct relationship where Amazon can go directly to the bank, it's going to be the bank's logo that appears. And so you're actually going to get direct customer contact with the bank, whereas you didn't have that before. So we'll actually do the opposite of disintermediation if the bank plays it right. If they play it wrong, then they turn into dumb pipes. And it's all about the choices that the banks will make.
I think from our perspective, we went down a decision path a couple of years ago to go the open API route on our digital platforms. We haven't fully realized that yet. We're kind of in the last stages. But the way we think about it is exactly some of the things you said, right? It allows us to extend our services and our capabilities where our customers are spending their time, right? Whether that's Facebook, on Amazon, what have you. It provides additional opportunities for us to be where our clients are. And I think there's different business models that come with that, right? So it's something, I think at CIBC specifically, we're excited about.
I think, to be fair, if you're on the positive side, this could be potentially a new revenue stream.
Absolutely.
For the banks that actually are ahead of the game. They're doing it right, and they actually can compete positively on scale, and it fundamentally changes the business model as well.
Absolutely.
I also think, observation-wise, I think there's been a huge shift in the last 6 to 12 months from the David versus Goliath scenario, right? Who roots for Goliath? And it's much more a collaboration now, because the fintechs are figuring out these banks are big, they're smart, they have a lot of smart people, they'll figure this out, but they actually need their customers and distribution channels. And the fintechs are still figuring that stuff out right now. Yeah. But I've seen a real shift in collaboration versus the fintechs are going to take over the incumbents.
I think Adam mentioned that earlier, right? Most of it's turning into B2B when it comes to fintech. Our perspective is we want to partner with fintechs. They obviously have advantages in areas we don't, access to maybe customers that we don't, technologies that we don't. We're open for business. That's why we are sitting here at Mars today, and we have so many relationships built around Mars, because Mars is a place where we can come and start to talk to these new startups and entrepreneurs and fintechs, and even in other technology areas, whether that's health tech or clean tech, that can benefit us as an organizations.
Oh, absolutely. And to kind of segue on this point about collaboration, because I know with our program that is something that we absolutely believe in. It's sort of our core philosophy. Some kind of corny phrase that people like to say in Silicon Valley is that money can be a little bit cheap. With our program, we think that an additional round of funding is really nice, but what's going to be much, much more powerful is an incumbent financial institution with their customer base and with their inside knowledge of the market that's going to collaborate with you and actually help you, scale that solution out. So, when you're looking to collaborate and facilitate that engagement, and I'd like to hear a bit from all of you, what are some best practices? If I'm a startup that is interested in engaging with TD, in engaging with CIBC, what should I be focused on? What do I need to consider? And what's the best way to get in?
Ideas. I mean, I think we actually see, somebody gave me a statistic, we actually see a FinTech company every single day. So we see essentially, 200 or 300 in an actual year. And it's all about the idea. And it's about trying to actually bring over more than just the customer experience, what it is that the value proposition fits. How can we work with you? Have you actually figured out some of the actual distinct things that we all think about? We will think regulatory. We will think risk. We will think cyber. We will think security. We will think about those things up front all the time. How do you bring your product with some of that lens whilst not letting that kind of cloud out the opportunity that you actually have? So kind of bring that mentality to us and then allow us to actually think on your behalf or with you as well in terms of how we can actually make the two ideals work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree. I agree. It very much has to do with the idea and the business proposition, coming back to us. To Tim's point, we see dozens a day probably sometimes, especially here at Mars. So it's really, really dependent on that.
So I'll give you, when we first went to the banks and we said, hey, look, we're opening up APIs, and the banks would always, every banker we talked to would always say, so what's your value prop? And I'm like, well, what's the value, what do you think the value prop of the World Wide Web is? What do you think the value prop of the internet is? I mean, it's like everything. It's like your whole, anything you do in the bank is going to be transformed by this. But they don't get it. Okay, so my advice then, and so we quickly figured it out. The advice is you dumb it down. And I hate to say that, but you dumb it down. You make it really, really simple. So you create very specific use cases. You say, we can be used for this. You have this huge customer, and he has this specific problem, and you can use this technology to do this. And you have this other customer who's doing this. And right now you're doing letters of credit, and you're doing it, and this costs you, and it's a pain for everybody. And so you break it down into very specific use cases. And once you get that, then you have a business owner, and there's a guy in the bank who says, I will go for this. Because banks are all about silos. And each person they don't look at the big picture. You can't go and pitch to a bank. Hey, we're doing open-eyed the API. This would be great for the bank. The only guy you can pitch that to is like the COO or the CEO. If you're pitching to someone lower in the organization, you have to understand what makes that person tick, how that person's motivated, what they're goaled on, and then you have to come up with very specific use cases that will make that person a hero. And that's the way you get the attention of the bank. So we went in at a very large UK bank, worldwide. They're in Hong Kong and all these other markets. We went in, and it took us 5 months to go through all the hurdles, because first you had to go through, okay, do you pass risk? Do you the security guys? What does the architecture guy think of you? And so you do this dog and pony show throughout the bank, and then once you get to that point, then it's like, we have this urgent customer need. It's one of our largest customers, and we want to get you deployed as soon as possible. And we said, what does that mean? They said 3 months. And we said, well, so what's the fastest you guys have ever deployed any project in your history? These guys are a very old bank. They said 6 months. Okay, so let me get this straight. You want to deploy us in half the time that you've ever deployed one of your projects. And this was out of pure dumb luck. They understood what we did. We had similar enough use cases, and they happened to find one. They had found this, one of their largest customer who had this pain point that we happened to just match, and they didn't have a solution for it. And that's how you get into a bank.
Steve Kirsch.
So having the privilege of working with folks like Steve, from a FinTech perspective, and also like Tim and Greg, let me share a couple perspectives. Number one, there was a recent study with the World Economic Forum report. 18 months, interviewed hundreds of fintechs, hundreds of incumbents and regulators. And one of the first insights was that this type of innovation and disruption is not random. It's absolutely deliberate and predictable.